Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Two weeks of rocket fire and explosions, but no sign of a truce in Israel. In fact, Sunday was the bloodiest day in this latest conflict. More than 40 people were killed in a single day. Both sides vow to continue firing. The world is calling for a de-escalation, but getting nowhere with those calls. The United Nations has failed to broker a ceasefire. The Organization of Islamic Countries has condemned Israel for what they called systematic infliction of atrocities on Palestinians in Gaza. America is for the first time not openly siding with Israel in a conflict. It is asking for proof that Hamas had presence in the media building which Israel bombed on Saturday. The building had offices of Al Jazeera and Associated Press. There are multiple videos of children caught in the crossfire. And these videos are coming from both sides. On Gravitas tonight, as we bring you the latest developments and statements, we look at where this conflict is going and where India stands on the Israel-Palestine equation. Also on the show, India's Wuhan virus cases have dropped below the 300,000 mark for the first time in 25 days. But so has testing. We'll bring you the latest numbers. Is China overcharging for medical supplies? Will rich countries share extra supplies and vaccines with the rest of the world? Are hyper-nationalism and greed feeding this pandemic? We'll bring you a report. It's the most political Miss Universe pageant in recent history. Miss Myanmar makes an appeal. She says, our people are dying. Contestants from Singapore and Uruguay also make political statements. And Bill Gates was investigated for an affair with an employee before he left Microsoft. The full story is coming up. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Nearly 150,000 people moved from their homes in the Indian state of Gujarat to safety as the most intense cyclone in more than 2 decades roared up the west coast. Cyclone Tauktae killed at least 12 people and left a trail of destruction across the coastal states of Kerala, Karnataka, Goa and Maharashtra. From the UN to Amnesty, fears abound that a new Swiss anti-terror law may threaten Switzerland's heritage as a human rights leader. The law grants sweeping powers to the police to prevent future attacks when faced with a quote-unquote potential terrorist. The law has been put in place following the deadly terror attacks in neighboring France in 2015. China's State Council has announced tough new restrictions on school curricula and ownership of private schools. This is the latest in a series of measures intended to tighten control of the country's fast-growing education sector. This new law will come into effect from September 1st and will halt the teaching of foreign curricula from kindergarten to grade 9. Earlier praised for its handling of the pandemic, Taiwan has imposed new curbs, including a limit on gatherings in its capital, to stem its biggest outbreak of 335 new daily cases. Meanwhile, the UK reopens for business after a strict 4-month lockdown. People in England can now hug each other, enjoy indoor dining, and gather in groups of 30 outdoors. In plans to ramp up its weaponry systems for naval forces, the Russian Navy will receive around 40 warships and vessels of different classes this year, says the government. This after Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu had said last year that the Navy was going to get 32 vessels in 2021, including 4 submarines, 6 surface vessels, as well as 22 motorboats and service vessels. Billed as a move to show himself as a statesman on Africa, French President Macron hosts African leaders, diplomats and lenders at a summit aimed at helping conflict-ridden Sudan. Heads of state will discuss investment in Sudan and renegotiate its debt to help the government in its transition after the 2019 ouster of strongman Omar al-Bashir. The first global study of its kind from the World Health Organization showed that 745,000 people died in 2016 from stroke and heart disease due to long hours. The report found that people living in Southeast Asia and Western Pacific region to be most affected. The WHO says this trend may worsen due to the pandemic. The head of UNICEF has asked G7 countries to donate supplies to the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme as an emergency measure to address a shortfall caused by the disruption in Indian vaccine exports. India curbed exports of the AstraZeneca vaccines made by its Serum Institute as the country battles the devastating second wave of infections. Stephen Curry secured his second NBA scoring title with a game of 46 points in the Golden State Warriors' 113-101 win over the Memphis Grizzlies. Curry finished the regular season with a 32-point scoring average, 0.7 better than Bradley Beal of the Washington Wizards. Curry is only the second player alongside Michael Jordan to win a scoring title after the age of 33. Cricket Australia's Integrity Unit has contacted Cameron Bancroft to ask if he has any new information about the Sandpapergate scandal from 2018. In a recent interview, Bancroft hinted that the bowlers in the Australian team were aware of the plot to tamper with the ball in the infamous Cape Town Test against South Africa that seemingly contradicted the findings of an official probe in the aftermath of the incident, which had held only 3 players guilty: Captain Steve Smith, Vice Captain David Warner, and Bancroft himself.
For the first time in 25 days, India's new infections have dropped below the 300,000 mark. The Wuhan virus is receding in the urban centres, but cases are on the rise in second and third tier cities. More than 280,000 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. Active cases have dropped by over 100,000. This is the biggest single-day drop ever. India's curve is showing a decline. Does that mean we've touched a peak? It's hard to say for 2 reasons. One, India tested less on Sunday. Almost 1.6 million tests were conducted yesterday on Sunday. Usually India conducts 1.8 to 1.9 million tests on average. So low testing could have led to fewer cases. Reason number 2, the virus is now spreading to rural India and data from rural centres is patchy. So peak or not, India has reported close to 25 million cases in this pandemic so far. There are 3.5 million active cases. More than 21 million people have recovered. The fatalities, though, are still not falling. And this is an indicator that the virus is still spreading and it is taking lives. Again, India has reported more than 4,000 deaths in a single day. Total deaths so far, close to 275,000. 275,000 people have died in India because of the Wuhan virus since last year. What about vaccinations? In the past 6 weeks, the daily rate of vaccination has dropped by half in India. In the first week of April, India was administering more than 4 million doses per day. In the second week of May, that figure has dropped to less than 2 million. The shortage is evident. India must bridge the gap to crush this surge, and we have results of 2 recent studies to back why vaccines are the silver bullet. The first one says that Covaxin is effective against the variants. This is the made in India shot Covaxin. It works against a strain found in the UK and the double mutant found in India. A journal called Clinical Infectious Diseases has published this finding. What about Covishield? It's the AstraZeneca shot that is made in India. Now, this one was restricted in Europe over fears of blood clots. Indian researchers say that will not be a problem in India. A government panel studied 498 cases of what they call serious and severe events. This was after 75 million shots were administered. Out of these, they found just 26 cases of blood clots. So just 26 cases out of 75 million shots. It's a minuscule figure. Blood clots remain extremely rare. The bottom line is this: both vaccines work, they're safe, and now India just needs to make sure it has more vaccines to go around. It's been 9 days since the raid at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 7 days since fighting between Israel and Gaza began. More than 211 people have died so far. 60 of them were children. The violence has entered a second week. Over the weekend, civilians and international media were all attacked. All lines have been blurred in this fighting, and there are no signs of de-escalation. As we speak, the exchange of fire is on. Some countries are accusing Israel of genocide. Others are upholding Israel's right to defend itself. As for Gaza, there are broadly two kinds of visuals coming out: either rockets being fired towards Israel or of children being caught in the crossfire. What's happening in West Asia is nothing short of a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis that has exacerbated the damage done by the pandemic. It's also a crisis that threatens to undo the peace process in the region. A full-blown war can still be avoided. But is the international community doing enough to ensure that? Also, what is India's stand on the conflict? We'll talk about all of this in our cover story tonight. We'll begin with a recap of what happened over the weekend, and we begin with Saturday, the intervening night of 14th and 15th of May. For the fifth straight night, rocket fire lit up the Gaza sky. Israeli airstrikes and explosions continued parallelly, but by the time the sun rose, 12 Palestinians had died in Gaza. Israel continued firing artillery, and Gaza continued firing its barrage of rockets. One of them hit a residential area in Ashdod. Another fell on a building in Ramat Gan. At least one person was killed in Israel. Saturday was also the Nakba Day. It's a day when Palestinians mark their displacement in the 1948-49 war, an event that created the modern state of Israel. Palestinian protesters gathered in the West Bank. Clashes with Israeli forces soon followed. In Gaza, a 12-story building was flattened by Israeli airstrikes. The tower had offices of international media, the Associated Press and Al Jazeera.
We are from the AP News Agency. We have a lot of equipment in that building. All the equipment is there, including the cameras, the live and editing equipment. Give me 15 minutes and I can bring all of it out.
The world watched this tower fall to the ground with a common question in mind. Why was the press attacked? Israel says this tower housed Hamas militants. Does it have evidence? None that it has presented so far. Rocket fire and airstrikes continued on the intervening night of May 15th and 16th. At least 100 rockets were fired into Israel. Sirens blared all night in Tel Aviv and its suburbs. Reports say at least 10 Israelis were injured that night while running for shelter. Back in Gaza, Israeli airstrikes killed 3 Palestinians. Israel says it also bombarded the house of the Hamas chief. Headlining Sunday was a hit-and-run incident in Sheikh Jarrah. It's a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It's at the heart of the ongoing violence. Sheikh Jarrah is very close to the historic Damascus Gate. It has a population of around 3,000 and is mostly inhabited by affluent Palestinians. But the land is contested. In October 2020, an Israeli court said that Palestinian families are living on land that belongs to Jews. In other words, the court said that Sheikh Jarrah belongs to Jews and not the Palestinians who live there. Palestinians appealed that decision. The case went to the Israeli Supreme Court and a decision was expected earlier this month. So tensions were growing around this case throughout the month of Ramadan. And because of these tensions, Israeli security forces banned the traditional Ramzan gathering near Damascus Gate. That's the reason they gave for the ban. They limited the number of worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Protests followed. Israeli forces raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the 7th of May. The violence spiraled, the court hearing was delayed, and then on Sunday, this happened.
نعم ما الذي شاهدناه
6 Israeli police officers were injured. The 42-year-old Palestinian driver was shot. Hamas did not claim responsibility for the attack but called the incident heroic. Overnight operations continued on Sunday night. At least 60 rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel. Israeli jets bombarded Gaza. At least 42 Palestinians were killed. 8 of them were children. It was the deadliest day in the ongoing fighting. But the rising death toll did nothing to stop the violence. These are images from earlier today. Israel claims to have destroyed tunnels used by Hamas. And what you see now are rockets being fired towards Israel from Gaza. This is what Gaza looks like after 7 days of airstrikes and firing. Funerals are being held daily. Gaza is among the world's most densely populated places. The strip of land is home to 2 million Palestinians. At least 201 of them have been killed in the last 1 week. 58 of them were children, 34 of them were women. Reports say over 1,200 people have been injured. In Israel, at least 10 people have been killed so far. 2 of them were children. As we speak, the threat of a civil war in Israel is rising. Over the weekend, police were seen scuffling with Arab protesters. There were demonstrations in Al-Fahim, Haifa, Sakhnin, Taibeh, Kalansawa, Jaffa and Tel Aviv. There were also protests against Israel outside its borders, including in Australia, Berlin, London and Lebanon. These images have gone viral. Also being shared widely are shots of people fleeing the beaches of Tel Aviv. Remember, Israel has numerous beach cities. It is also home to a booming tourism industry. The violence, the barrage of rockets and blaring sirens are scaring away domestic and international tourists. So clearly the escalating violence is helping no one. But who will end it? Not Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. He says Israel's battle against Hamas will continue.
Our battle against the terror organization continues in full force. We are charging very heavy prices from Hamas for their unbearable aggression. The IDF carried out attacks on more than 1,500 targets during the last days.
What about Hamas? It says raining rockets on Israel is easier for them than drinking water. That's what they said. And like we've been saying, for Hamas, this fight is an opportunity to strengthen its claims to the leadership of the Palestinian movement. It suits them politically. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammad Shtayyeh has asked the international community to intervene and stop Israel from, quote-unquote, committing crimes punishable by international law.
Israel cannot combine its occupation and crimes against us with having peace and security for free.
So what is the international community doing? The Pope has called for an end to the fighting. United Nations Secretary General has said that the hostilities in Israel and Gaza are, quote-unquote, utterly appalling. The OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, held an emergency meeting on Sunday. It slammed Israel for what it called systematic crimes against Palestinians. The group's most prominent member, Saudi Arabia, condemned the, quote-unquote, provocative Israeli plans while reiterating its support for the two-state solution, meaning having 2 states, one for the Palestinians, one for the Israelis. The United Nations Security Council also held a meeting on the situation on Sunday. Nearly all countries in attendance called for an immediate ceasefire. And in an interesting break from the past, the United States avoided taking sides. In fact, instead of siding with Israel, Washington asked Israel for evidence to justify the erasing of the Gaza media building. What about India? Where does India stand on this conflict, the oldest conflict in West Asia? Over the last few days, social media enthusiasts in India have thrown themselves on either side of this conflict. But if we put the trends and counter-trends aside, what is India's official stance? Historically, India has supported the Palestinian cause. But today, India views this conflict as an internal matter of Israel and Palestine. New Delhi follows what they call a de-hyphenation policy, meaning it maintains an independent relationship with Israel and an independent relationship with Palestine. Both are separate, both stand on their own merit. The stance reflects in India's latest statement at the United Nations Security Council. New Delhi has called upon both sides to de-escalate and resume direct dialogue. It has expressed strong support for the just Palestinian cause, opposed Hamas rocket fire against Israel, and underlined an unwavering commitment to the two-state solution. Interestingly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not included India in the list of 25-odd countries that he has thanked for standing by Israel in its hour of crisis. Our next report tells you more.
ये कहा जा रहा है जनता पार्टी की सरकार बन गई, वो अरबों का साथ नहीं देगी, इजराइल का साथ देगी। आदरणीय मुरारजी भाई इस स्थिति को स्पष्ट कर चुके हैं। गलतफहमी को दूर करने के लिए मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि हम हर एक प्रश्न को गुण और अवगुण के आधार पर देखेंगे, लेकिन मध्य पूर्व के बारे में यह स्थिति साफ है कि अरबों की जिस जमीन पर इजराइल कब्जा करके बैठा है वो जमीन उसको खाली करना होगी।
In the past, India had been a major champion of the Palestinian cause, the only non-Arab country to recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, as the legitimate representative of Palestinians. In 1975, the PLO was even allowed to open an office in New Delhi. And 5 years later, in 1980, this office was given full diplomatic status. What about Israel? In 1948, India voted against the creation of Israel. Until 1992, India did not establish diplomatic ties with Israel. But behind the scenes, the two sides were collaborating. Israel helped India in the 1971 war against Pakistan for the liberation of Bangladesh. It took another 2 decades for India to recognize Israel. Since then, the relationship has blossomed at all levels. Israel helped India with defense technology during the Kargil War, with hardware during Operation Parakram against Pakistan in 2002. And by 2013, India had become Israel's 3rd largest trading partner in Asia. The proximity between India and Israel did not come at the cost of India's relationship with Palestine. In 2003, India voted for a UN resolution against the construction of the West Bank wall by Israel. In 2011, it voted in favor of accepting Palestine as a full member of UNESCO. And in 2014, India supported a UN HRC resolution to probe Israel's offensive in Gaza. With time, this balancing act became tougher. But pragmatism and non-alignment continued to drive India's approach, as it dealt with Israel and Palestine independently. This was underpinned by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Israel in 2017.
My singular honor to be the first ever Prime Minister of India to undertake this groundbreaking visit to Israel.
And a subsequent visit to Palestine in 2018.
भारत इस क्षेत्र में शांति और स्थिरता की बहुत उम्मीद करता है.
In February 2019, India used Israeli-made Spice 2000 bombs to strike Pakistani terror launch pads in Balakot. In December 2019, India voted against America's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. For India, the capital is the city of Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem, which remains contested. The trend is clear. India's decisions are based on a mature understanding and evaluation of the Israel-Palestine issues. And New Delhi is following the same approach now as Israel and Palestine exchange rocket fire. India has refused to pick a side, called for de-escalation and dialogue.
Immediate de-escalation is the need of the hour, so as to arrest any further slide towards the brink. We urge both sides to show extreme restraint, desist from actions that exacerbate tensions, and refrain from attempts to unilaterally change the existing status quo, including in East Jerusalem and its neighborhood.
The way ahead is clear. Given its strategic interest in West Asia and its growing partnership with Israel, it is unlikely that India is going to change its approach towards Palestine or Israel. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
What is the most effective weapon of war? I know what most of you are thinking, maybe a supersonic jet or perhaps a nuclear bomb, but these are weapons of destruction. We are talking about a far more superior tool, one that gives you the upper hand even before a single shot is fired. We are talking about the art of propaganda. Just look at some of these posters. These are from the last century during the world wars. They had no internet back then. So thousands of these posters would be pasted around the country, and they had one objective: to evoke emotions. Because no war is successful without public support. And public support is hard to win without propaganda. And that rule applies even today. But it's done not with posters, but on social media. There are hundreds of activists, even journalists, talking about the violence in Gaza, and some of them are not even on the same continent. But that's social media for you. Anyone and everyone has a perspective to share. In the last few days, the conversation is focused on a certain demographic: children. They have been made the face of this tragedy. Now, let me make one thing clear. Murdering children is the most appalling war crime. There can be no excuse for it. So far, 58 children have been killed in these strikes. When the dust settles, both sides must answer for this atrocity. You know what's worse than killing these children? Using them as props in a war, milking their situation for propaganda, and it's happening. People are sharing pictures and videos of slain children. What purpose does this serve? Their families are forced to relive the trauma. There is no dignity in death for these children. These pictures are beamed across the world. Why do people continue to do it? The most common answer is this: it's being done to reveal the true picture, the true horror, to show the world how bad the situation is. But this is just an excuse. In reality, these children are being used as props. They're pawns in a grand narrative war. Let me give you examples, and we start with the ongoing conflict. Israel accuses Hamas of using children as human shields. Hamas accuses Israel of targeting schools and shelters. And then both of them make videos to evoke sympathy. Here's a video that shows a 10-year-old girl from Gaza. She's surrounded by a pile of rubble. Her eyes are brimming with tears. And what does one reporter do? Stick a mic and camera in her face.
What do you expect me to do? Fix it? I'm only 10. I can't even do anything in this war. I just want to be a doctor or anything to help my people, but I can't. I'm just a kid. I don't even know what to do. I get scared, but not really that much. I do anything for my people, but I don't know what to do. I'm just 10. I'm just 10. All of this, when I see it, I literally cry every day, saying to myself, why do we deserve this? What did we do to this? My family said they just hate us. They just don't like us because we are Muslims. Why does Muslims act for you like that? We're just, you see all of the kids around me, they're just kids.
Here's another one. It shows a 6-year-old being pulled out from the rubble. Her face is covered in gashes. Her parents are distraught, but social media is busy turning her into a poster girl. Why is this wrong, you could ask? Because it's a dangerous trend. Children, you see, do not understand politics. They do not understand war. The world should be shielding them from this trauma. Instead, some people are putting them dead in center, and we've seen this happen before in almost every conflict. Do you remember this picture? It was taken in 2016 in Aleppo. The boy you see is Omran Daknish. He was pulled out from the rubble after a Russian airstrike. Soon the picture was everywhere. At 5 years of age, this boy became the face of Syrian resistance. But here's the other side of the story. Omran now lives in regime territory. His family was always pro-government. His father says Omran was used as a propaganda tool by the rebels. Then there's this picture of Alan Kurdi, a Syrian boy who was fleeing to Europe with his family. Their boat capsized, drowning Alan and his brother and his mother. This picture was all over the internet. They say donations surged after it was released. But at what cost? Is advertising a 3-year-old's tragic death the only way to get people's attention? And what about consent? Do these children want to be poster kids? Let me show you another picture. The Afghan girl. They called her the third world's Mona Lisa. Her actual name is Sharbat Gula. She was clicked in a Pakistani refugee camp in 1985. For years, nobody knew her name or where she lived. But the picture made the front page of National Geographic. Decades later, in 2019, Sharbat Gula spoke out. She was enraged because her picture was published without her consent. This is the reality of our times. Even children are fair game in propaganda. In 2001, when America launched their operation in Afghanistan, they dug up Sharbat Gula's picture. So in the 80s, she was used against the Soviet occupation. In the 2000s, against the Taliban. The fact is, these campaigns are not out of love for these children. It's about gaining sympathy, about winning the narrative war, because as they say, the smallest coffins are the heaviest. But if you want to stop violence and safeguard your children, do not use them for social media campaigns. Instead, blame the politicians and their governments. If tragedy has a face, it is not the face of innocent children, but manipulative leaders and their cunning power plays. And speaking of children, I've said this before, we are not paying enough attention to what the virus could do to children. They could be directly in the line of fire as the virus mutates and evolves further. In Singapore, all schools at the primary and secondary junior levels will be shut Wednesday onwards. This is after authorities revealed that the COVID variant from India appears to be affecting children more than adults. The variant first found in India. Same in Brazil, where the virus appears to be killing small children at an unusually high rate. Reports say more than 2,200 children under the age of 5 have died in Brazil in recent months, a number that hasn't been seen elsewhere. Even Taiwan, which is a COVID success story, has shut down all schools until the 28th of May in capital Taipei. This is in anticipation of children getting infected after more than 300 new cases were reported this weekend. What does all of this tell you? The threat is real. The warnings are increasing. Our next report tells you why India, where a third wave has already been predicted, needs to take these warnings seriously and prepare in advance.
Singapore is shutting down schools. Classes are being shifted online. Home-based learning is set to be back. The city-state, which not long ago was ranked the safest place during the pandemic, is witnessing a spike in infections, with cases being reported even in children. On Sunday, 38 locally transmitted cases were reported, the highest number in a year. This included 4 children linked to a cluster at a tuition center. All these cases belong to the B1617 strain, which was first detected in India. Ong Ye Kung, Singapore's education minister, has said some of these mutations are much more violent and they seem to attack younger children. None of the children are seriously ill, but this is an area of concern for all of us. Authorities have announced the closure of all schools until the end of the term. They also plan to vaccinate children below 16 years. Taiwan, another success story during this pandemic, has taken a similar step. 333 local cases were reported on the weekend. The virus is threatening Taiwan's status of a safe haven. Authorities fear infections among children. All schools in Taipei and adjacent areas have all suspended classes until the end of term. In Hong Kong, infections from the South Africa strain are on the rise. A 4-month-old baby has been confirmed as the youngest person to contract this strain. This has led to health experts suggesting mandatory tests for all school children and limiting the number of students in classes. And in Brazil, the situation is the most alarming. The virus appears to be killing children at an unusually high rate. In recent months, at least 832 children under the age of 5 have died due to the Wuhan virus. Health experts say this figure could be inaccurate, as lack of widespread testing is making many cases going undiagnosed, and as the virus mutates further, authorities fear it would have a severe impact on children, even unborn babies. India must analyze these global trends and prepare in advance as it awaits a third wave. It must prioritize the safety of children and take the following steps at the earliest. 1. Set up a pediatric task force at state and district levels. 2. Reserve a fixed number of beds for children at all levels. 3. Get stocks of medicines and essential supplies ready. And 4. Start vaccinating children as soon as possible. India has a window of opportunity to prevent another catastrophe. It must make the most of this opportunity. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Our next story is about a pageant that turned political. I'm talking about the 70th edition of Miss Universe. Yes, it's still taking place, the pandemic notwithstanding. The pageant was lit up with colourful protests, with contestants using the limelight to unveil messages about political and social issues. The messages of 3 such contestants stood out. The first one was by Miss Singapore, Bernadette Bell. She strode down the ramp wearing an outfit inspired by the colours of Singapore's national flag and a message that read, "Stop Asian Hate." The second was by Miss Uruguay, Lola de los Santos, who showed support for the LGBTQ community with a rainbow-themed outfit that read, "No more hate, violence, rejection and discrimination." The third and the most talked about, you could say, was Miss Universe Myanmar, Thuzar Wint Luin, who used a scroll to express solidarity with the people of a country. The message on the scroll read, "Pray for Myanmar." Like I said, it was a politically charged pageant. All 3 messages shared are equally important, there is no doubt. But the one from Myanmar is making most headlines. It's been more than 100 days since the military coup, and the situation in Myanmar is progressing from bad to worse. More than 790 people have died, but the anti-coup demonstrations have not stopped. Our next report tells you what's happening in the country.
Okay, up next.
At first, it seemed like an ordinary ramp walk. It ended up as an extraordinary display of courage. Pray for Myanmar. This was Thuzar Wint Luin's message to the world as she unveiled a scroll during the national costume segment of Miss Universe 2021. Luin did not make it to the last round of the pageant, but she won the award for the costume category. For standing up for the rights of her people. Luin is just one among dozens of celebrities, actors, athletes and influencers who have been vehemently opposing the actions of Myanmar's military junta.
I decided to reject any participation to the Tokyo Olympic Games under the auspices of the Myanmar Olympic Committee, because I believe the Myanmar Olympic Committee is a puppet Olympic committee of the military regime in Myanmar that has been accused of genocide.
At least 790 people have been killed by security forces since the February 1st coup. Over 5,000 people have been arrested. Out of this, 4,000 are still under detention. But none of this has deterred the spirit of Myanmar's youth, which continues to carry out large-scale demonstrations across Myanmar in the hope of restoring democracy.
The junta might like people to think that things are going back to normal because they're not killing as many people as they were before, and there weren't as many people on the streets as before. But definitely the feeling, that we're getting from talking to people on the ground is that definitely, the resistance has not yet subsided. It is just no longer as visual as before.
It's been more than 3 months. The resistance is far from fizzling out. The army junta is struggling to impose its rule. The ongoing protests, the civil disobedience movement, and battlefield losses to ethnic guerrilla armies are raising questions on whether the coup has failed. Observers say it has.
I think by definition it has failed. The fact that there is continued resistance to it and the entire country is pretty much united against the military, and it's been 3 months of chaos, means that the military seriously miscalculated their own country's response to this naked grab for power.
Internationally, the pressure on the army junta persists. From the European Union to the United States, almost every leading country has imposed targeted sanctions on Myanmar in the hopes of cutting down the army's operations and forcing the generals to change course. Back in South Asia, ASEAN leaders are pressurizing the army to restore democracy.
The situation in Myanmar is not acceptable and should not continue. Violence needs to stop, and there must be a return to democracy, stability and peace.
But reversing the coup won't be an easy task. For democracy to return in Myanmar, the army's unchecked power will have to be contained. Even if this fundamental shift is achieved, there is no guarantee that it would sustain. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall. It sums up Bill Gates right now. He was the poster boy of philanthropy. When he wasn't fighting polio in Africa, he was spending quality time with his wife. But as it turns out, Bill Gates is not the perfect guy. In fact, he isn't even close. From starting an affair with his employee to secret meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, the dirt is piling on Bill Gates. Here's a report.
March 2020. It was the end of an era at Microsoft. After 45 years of leading and mentoring, Bill Gates was walking away. Better things awaited him, he said, like philanthropy and battling climate change. But turns out he wasn't running towards better things, but away from a checkered past. This is a story from the turn of the century. Bill Gates, then an all-American family man, began an affair with his employee. It would stay hidden for nearly 2 decades. In this time, Bill Gates built on his lovable grandpa image. He founded the Gates Foundation, toured Africa to eradicate polio, and pledged to donate half his wealth to charity. His secret affair would have most likely remained a secret, if not for the Me Too movement. In 2019, Microsoft received a complaint from an employee. She accused Bill Gates of trying to initiate an affair. This violated company policy, and not to mention the skewed power dynamics. After all, Bill Gates was the powerful founder/CEO. Microsoft roped in a law firm to investigate. But before they could finish the probe, Bill Gates resigned. For better things, remember? So, was this a coincidence or a backdoor deal? Reports say the company's directors wanted Gates out. They felt his relationship with the employee was inappropriate. The company isn't talking much about the controversy. Board member or not, you don't throw Bill Gates under the bus at Microsoft. He denies any link between the affair and his exit. A spokeswoman for Gates had this to say. There was an affair almost 20 years ago which ended amicably. The decision to transition off the board was in no way related to this matter. But did the affair end amicably for both parties? The only way to find out is a thorough investigation, not one that ends with a resignation. The nature of Bill Gates' affair is coming under scrutiny. He has himself to blame for that. Earlier this month, Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce. Some reports say Melinda was unsettled by her husband's connections with Jeffrey Epstein. Gates is said to have met Epstein multiple times, including at Epstein's notorious New York townhouse. Gates' spokeswoman did not deny the meetings, but she says they have been wrongly characterized. This time, it's his words against a dead man's. A reportedly sour divorce, an inappropriate relationship with an employee, and meetings with a convicted sex offender. Bill Gates' lovable grandpa image has been shredded. So, it's time we ask the uncomfortable question. Was the world's biggest charity drive a shot at redemption? A shrewd plan to rehabilitate himself? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Can you think of a time more taxing than the pandemic? For most of us, this pandemic is the most stressful time of our life. There's stress resulting from the grief of losing a loved one, stress caused by the fear of losing a near one, stress from trying to stay safe, and of course the stress from adjusting to the constantly changing new normal. Masks, tests, vaccines, lockdowns, work from home, online learning. Do you know high stress levels can be fatal? And I guess I'm not helping you reduce stress with the way this story is going, but bear with me. It's important to know what's happening. Stress can lead to high blood pressure, also what's known as hypertension, and prolonged hypertension can lead to severe medical conditions. So while we have finally started addressing mental health problems resulting from anxiety and stress, it's also time to acknowledge and spread awareness about hypertension itself. But why am I telling you all of this tonight? Because today is World Hypertension Day, and it makes for a perfect opportunity to address a silent killer. What is hypertension? It is when the force of your blood, the blood against your artery walls, becomes high enough for it to result in health problems. What kind of health problems are we talking about? Uncontrolled hypertension can result in heart attack and stroke. It can also narrow the blood vessels in your kidney, preventing them from functioning normally. Hypertension can also lead to thickening or narrowing of blood vessels in the eyes, resulting in the loss of vision. It can affect your memory, also lead to dementia. 1.3 billion people worldwide, 1.3 billion, have hypertension. How will we know if we have it too? What are the symptoms of hypertension? The Mayo Clinic says most people with high blood pressure do not show symptoms. That's even when their blood pressure reaches dangerous levels. Some people, however, have headaches, they have shortness of breath or nose bleeding. Next question. What causes hypertension? So there are two types of hypertension, and each one has its own causes. The first one is called primary hypertension. It develops over time. It has no specific causes. Most people who have hypertension fall under the primary category. It is sometimes linked to genes, your lifestyle choices, poor diet, or physical changes like obesity or aging. The second one is the secondary type, secondary hypertension. It can be caused by sleep apnea, problems with thyroid, a kidney disease, alcohol abuse, side effects of medication, sometimes also because of drug abuse. The secondary type, the secondary hypertension, is more severe than the primary one. The World Health Organization says hypertension is a major cause of premature deaths worldwide. The good news is, hypertension can be treated. It can be managed by reducing stress levels, making little changes in your diet, and by regularly checking blood pressure and consulting doctors. You can reduce the risk of hypertension by making small changes like adhering to what is called the DASH diet. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, DASH. Like consuming whole grains, fresh vegetables, low-fat dietary products, reducing your alcohol intake, exercising regularly, monitoring your body weight, reducing your stress levels. Now, I know that the pandemic is really stressful, but hypertension can result in COVID complications, and we all know that. So while we come to terms with prolonged online learning, long hours of work from home, additional caregiving responsibilities, it is important that we keep our stress levels. Do things at home that make you happy. Take time out. Cook your say. Don't stress over things you cannot change. And today it affected Kerala, Karnataka, Goa and Maharashtra. States that are back battling the Wuhan virus. And the worst might be yet to come. This is the most severe cyclone to hit Gujarat in at least 20 years. Reports say more than 200,000 people have been moved from the coastal areas. Ports and major airports have been shut. The cyclone Tokte, could threaten Asiatic lions in the state as well. These are endangered species. The Gir forest of Gujarat is believed to be at the center of the storm. Authorities say they are monitoring around 40 lions in some patches. Earlier today, the storm hit India's financial capital, Mumbai. Strong winds with speeds up to 100 kilometers an hour were recorded. It damaged vaccination centers, among other places. The Mumbai airport has been closed till 10 p.m. tonight due to rains, 10 p.m. IST. A few hours back, India's weather department issued an update. It called this cyclone an extremely severe cyclonic storm with wind speeds of up to 185 kilometers an hour. The landfall will continue for a few more hours in Gujarat. So far, 38 people have been rescued. We'll keep track for you of what happens on this front. We're wrapping up this edition of Gravitas, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.